Granddaughter. My grandmother, Helen Coates, passed away Tuesday morning at the age of 98. She was born and raised in Yosemite Valley, a place that was not just her homeland, but a sacred center of who we are as Native people. She lived in one of the last remaining Miwok homes inside of the park. But in 1969, the National Park Service burned her home down during a fire training drill. It was not an accident. It was part of a policy meant to remove the last visible traces of native life of Yosemite. They called it management. We know it as erasure. That home was more than wood and roof. It was a place where our language was spoken, where our prayers were made, where our way of life continued in spite of everything. That fire was not just physical, it was historical. It was symbolic of how the United States has treated indigenous people from generations. Remove them, erase them, and pretend they're no longer here. But my grandmother was there, and so were our ancestors. She was raised by her grandmother, Lucy Tellis, a master basket weaver whose art and legacy still lives in Yosemite Village Museum today. Those baskets weren't made for decoration. They were made with sacred intention, with connection to the land and the elders before her. They are evidence that we have always been here, living, creating, and carrying on. And yet, despite that undeniable presence, our tribe is still not federally recognized. We've been fighting for recognition for over 40 years. 4 decades of submitting documentations, photographs, oral histories, cultural records, and anything to prove that we already know and live. We are sovereign people. But our fight didn't start 40 years ago. It began between 1850 and 1852, when our ancestors signed peace treaties with the U.S. government, agreements that promised us land and protection if we laid down our weapons and cooperated with the new settlers. We honored our side of those treaties, but the U.S. government did not. Those treaties were never ratified. They were hidden away in Washington, D.C., and our people were left without the land or the promises that they were told they'd receive. That betrayal echoes with every generation since. Today, we feel the consequences of that betrayal in very real ways. Because we're not federally recognized, we have no guaranteed land base, no access to federal funding for healthcare, education, or housing. We receive no legal protection for our sacred sites, no ability to fully practice our culture on our own land. We also continue to face limitations around traditional gathering in Yosemite, the very place where our ancestors are buried and where my grandmother was born. While we've been denied inclusion in the agreements that have been extended to federally recognized tribes, we do have our own long-standing gathering agreement with NPS. We are fortunate for that. We are still navigating injustices that should no longer exist. Even federally recognized tribes must go through burdensome permit process to gather traditional materials, reporting in detail of what's being collected, where it's been taken from, and how it affects the environment. It is an exhausting process rooted in control, not trust. Another way the system works against us. These injustices are still built into the system, and we continue to face them just for trying to carry on our traditions. And let me be clear, the work that we do, the gathering from the plants, collecting our medicines, and carrying out cultural burning is not destructive, it's restorative. These are ancient practices passed down with care and respect for the land. Time after time, it's been proven that these actions benefit the ecosystems around us. Cultural burning, in particular, helps reduce wildfire risk, improves soil health, and supports natural growth in native plants. Our practices are not a threat to the environment, it's a part of the healing. And it's not just an environment or cultural issue. This is a civil rights issue. When a people are denied access to their sacred lands, when they are told that their ceremonies are illegal, when we are forced to fight for decades just to be acknowledged, that is a violation of civil rights. We are told to prove our existence while our history is being erased right in front of us. So today, in the spirit of John Lewis and the legacy of Good Trouble, I'm asking you to listen and to act. Because we are not federally recognized, we receive no federal support. Our tribal programs, our legal battles, our community efforts are all funded through the work of our own people and the kindness of supporters like you. If our story moves you, please consider donating to the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation. Your support helps us continue our recognition fight, maintain cultural programs, protect our sacred lands, and take care of our elders and our youth. This is not about politics, this is about justice, about dignity, about the right to be who we are on the land that made us. I wish my grandmother had lived to see our tribe become federally recognized. She deserved that closure, that respect, that acknowledgement. But I stand here today promising that her fight and our fight will not stop. We are still here, we are still resisting, and we are still rising. Let's keep that good fight going. Let's keep making good trouble for Native rights, for land justice, and for every community that has been silenced for too long. Thank you.
That was great. Give it up for Acacia and representing her tribe. You're such a strong people. And incredibly fierce in that fight that that line that they've held for 40 plus years, 42 I believe, 43. We're up against a long fight. I've been thinking about Alcatraz, that's what the name he came up with. Yes. And all the other detention centers. It reminded me of the internment camps. It reminded me of the discovery my cousin had only a few months ago that his aunt was born in an internment camp. We didn't know why she was born in Oklahoma. Turns out the years are match up, and we were able to do some digging. It was really a shameful thing that happened to the Japanese Americans, with ripple effects that made their way to our kitchen just a few months ago. I wanted to remind you guys, in the case of Korematsu versus the United States, a Japanese American brought to issue that the president could intern his own to the jail and hunt them down and take them out of California, Oregon, and Washington, and put them in the first state or any other thing they can manage. And I want to remind you that only in 1980 did the Civil Liberties Act come to fruition. So only in 1980 did the government then say, you know what, we were wrong. And then, in 2018, the Korematsu decision was formally overturned. So from the 1940 ruling that said it's perfectly fine to intern Japanese Americans to 2018, that didn't just happen. Time passed, but it was us changing society, convincing our neighbors, convincing our communities, one conversation at a time, one heart-to-heart at a time, that was wrong. And there's this disconnect now, where I'm on an airplane, and somebody I don't know, he's saying, "Oh, they were doing something illegal." This kind of there's everyone comes from some form of logic, and it's not up to us to say that you're wrong. It's up to us to figure out where did you go, where direction did you go wrong at? Let's find a common ground, and then let's try to bring you back. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take decades. But that's why we need community. We need to go far. We don't need to go fast. With that, I'm going to bring it to Bob Navarro. Please give it up. Come on.
Wow, this is great. There are some excellent speakers. Really. Appreciate it. Okay, the title of my talk is Solidarity plus Nonviolence equals Resistance.
Talk about my.
And I start with a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. There is no great people without virtue. There are no great nations. There is even no society without respect for human rights. For what is the value of a community of thinking and intelligent individuals who are united solely by force? And that was written, what, 1840 or something like that? And we're still there. The current situation. Now, I want to be clear that I am not talking about politics. I don't care about politics. Simone Weil, writing in 1930s Europe, argued that political parties should be abolished because they exist only to adhere to a party line, and instead of the received wisdom of political dogma, each of us should be thinking independently and making our own judgments and criticisms, irrespective of the cliches of the party line. They also said cliches are just excuses from having to do the painful work of thinking. And I would add, acting. I'm not talking about politics because our dilemma is not about politics. It is about the death of politics in favor of the simple dynamic of power versus anyone who fails to submit. We are about building a resistance to an arbitrary power that vacillates from one cruelty to the next cruelty daily just to keep you guessing and afraid. Let's consider the painful irony that the day set aside for the honoring and remembering of Martin Luther King Jr. was the same day of the inauguration of at least 4 more years of mendacity, cruelty, and the willful destruction of institutions, the rule of law, of decency itself, in favor of something called the state of exception. Totalitarianism thrives on the state of exception. It is like the suspension of law in order to deal with a national emergency, but without an actual emergency, making the leader sovereign, and the rule of law is whatever the leader says it is. It is not yet clear that this renewed administration will make the state of exception permanent, but they will try, and they have had many successes so far. Many are already bending the knee and capitulating, if not enthusiastically collaborating. Justice has become revenge. Freedom is becoming a transactional commodity of exchange. In Memphis, Dr. King said, "Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be." And in Memphis, his life was taken from him, and we were robbed of a man of peace who dared to speak the truth. So, Langston Hughes is still right. The dream is deferred. And Albert Camus is right also. The absurdity of a life denied justice requires a responding attitude of love and rebellion. Resistance as an attitude of solidarity and love in defiance of the agents of alienation. You know who they are. They're walking the streets today. Adam Michnik, the great freedom fighter in Soviet-occupied Poland, from prison, cautioned that realism demands never recognizing the legitimacy of oppression, while, citing Martin Luther King, living as best one can in strategic, nonviolent disobedience. King, Michnik, Timothy Snyder, the author of On Freedom, all recognize that this can only be achieved in solidarity, which is what's happening here. The experience of disobedience and solidarity, so this is a little of my backstory. The realization when I was 18 years old that my government was perfectly willing and indeed anxious that I be inducted into the Army to fight in quite possibly die in what even I, as immature as I was at that point, I could see was an illegitimate war, presented me with my first dilemma of conscience. Do I go to Canada like some friends had, or submit? To avoid the draft, which realistically meant going to Vietnam, I enlisted in 1966 as a kind of Hail Mary strategy that worked for me. When I joined, I was already a member of the Students of a Democratic Society. I was assigned to so-called Army intelligence and served, so to speak, overseas until mid-1968 when I was assigned to Fort Carson, Colorado. I learned there was a Students for Democratic Society chapter in nearby Colorado Springs. I met with them and helped them put on a well-attended, nonviolent anti-war march. They were glad to have an active duty soldier join them. I wrote up a leaflet advertising the march, which informed other GIs how to legally attend. I mimeographed about 1,000 copies of the leaflet and gave it to the chapter, which hired a small airplane to drop it over the Fort Carson, which would be insane to do today. They shot down immediately. As part of the steering committee, I got to join the SDS members holding the banner leading the march. There were a lot of photographers in front of us, one of whom was intentionally getting close and snapped a shot of me. 2 days later, I was hauled into the Army Security Office, where I happily admitted my role in putting together the march and was immediately stripped of my top secret security clearance. I can't imagine why. The fact that I followed the Army's rules for a soldier to participate in civil actions and that I was surrounded by hundreds of lawful, peaceful protesters meant that I would not be charged for aiding or abetting in the demonstration. However, about 1 month after I was discharged in January '69, I was told by a friend still in my unit the FBI had come to serve me with a misdemeanor arrest warrant for misuse of government property. They didn't pursue it, unfortunately. Then, in October of 1968, still in Colorado, I attended the SDS convention in Boulder, Colorado. I was only one of 2 GIs in attendance. The SDS was breaking up into warring factions. One camp was, at the time, calling themselves the Up Against the Wall MFers, those children. That group later became the Weather Underground. In addition to disrupting the meeting, they were leaving the meeting, they were going out and beating up counter-protesters and reporters. Their claim, loudly broadcast, that violent rebellion was the only legitimate and effective response to the Vietnam War puzzled me.
You're good. Go ahead.
Since I was in the Army at the time. The U.S. military was actively routinely killing thousands of opposing troops, and most of all, innocent Vietnamese, and these weathermen were going to go out and bring the U.S. to its knees. I sort of doubted that. Good intentions, badly executed, is not good strategy and not a virtue, but the virtue of nonviolence. Adam Michnik credited the Solidarity labor movement in Poland with successfully undermining the communist regime because Solidarity had the realism to not call for the overthrow of the state and to always proclaim instead and practice nonviolence to create space, no matter how small, for freedom wherever the opportunity presented itself. It took time. This bill I was talking about, but it worked. He emphasized that the movement was not on a quest for power, but for the virtues of honesty, justice, and dignity. Michnik claimed that the source of the movement's adherence to nonviolence was embedded in the dynamics of means and ends. Here I quote him: "The use of violence, spoiling means and ends at the same time, would have polluted the movement's virtue and its strength." One of Solidarity's methods was to act locally, of which Michnik says, if you wish to act locally, then what could be more local than yourself? I hasten to add that neither Michnik nor Dr. King were pacifists. A form of nonviolence is strategic legal action. Catherine Campbell, my wife Carolyn Phillips, Tom Quinn and I were a legal team in the 1990s that took on the institutional violence of the Department of Corrections over the so-called gladiator fights in the shoe yards at Corcoran, California. In an actual gladiator fight, two reasonably well-matched opponents fight to the death, and the crowd cheers the victor. The formulation was more cynical at Corcoran. The staff intentionally set two inmates into a small concrete confines of a shoe yard, knowing the two were either enemies of some sort who did not want to be on the same yard and confront each other, but were bound by gang culture to fight even past the demands of the guards that they stop. The failure to stop gave the guards permission to shoot. The prison staff would gather to watch, and money was exchanged on who would survive. Over the course of 5 years, about 33 inmates in the California prison system were shot to death by guards. No, were shot by guards, eight of them fatally. With the help of an informant, the lawsuit exposed the corruption of the CDC, and they were forced into settling the case and ending the practice. Power hates exposure of its inherent inner weakness, and hates being blamed for causing the government having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. Again, in Memphis, Dr. King spoke of the need of solidarity and nonviolence, but also of that other imperative, action. And in telling the parable of the Good Samaritan, he warned against the idea of compassion by proxy. Thus, another form of solidarity and nonviolence is to challenge the power of the state with your sovereign body. In the end, all we have is our bodies. It should be remembered that before Dr. King, James Farmer, who founded the Congress for Racial Equality, CORE, a devotee of Gandhi, at age 21 led the first nonviolent lunch counter direct action that desegregated a restaurant in Chicago in 1941. Carolyn and I represented the brave free souls of the Occupy Fresno movement in Fresno at Courthouse Park, the longest continual occupation movement in the country. Based on the county's unconstitutional regulation of free speech, the park is considered a free speech zone. Over the first 45 days, the sheriff's office made 109 arrests. A lawsuit forced a change in the regulations and the dismissal of all the charges of everyone who was arrested, including myself. Labor strikes require putting bodies and livelihoods on the line, as the group I'm associated with, Central Valley Partnership, knows.
So do you want to be
The
right after Maggie
SEIU local
in the
2015 strike,
is going
in
to
which
read the
our group
essay?
assisted,
as soon
put
as she's
bodies
done, you
on the
wanna just
line
pop on
for
your music
human
so we
health
have-
care, home health care workers,
Have like a fun
and
vibe
with
as
great brio
pop up
and
and
even
say
a
my little
sense of
thing?
celebration, occupied the exits available for the Fresno Board of
actually, would you
Supervisors,
do a double
metaphorically
I
imprisoning
wanted to,
them with
recording.
their own bad
We're live.
judgment.
That's okay. We're live. It's fine.
I wanted
That
to,
occupation was well planned, pragmatic, and successfully executed in a demonstration of solidarity.
Read them.
It also resulted in arrests and detentions were not expected, which were not unexpected, as law enforcement had been briefed on the plan. Solidarity in Poland was, of course, fundamentally a labor movement involving strategic nonviolent strikes, including a general strike, but reached beyond labor to being a measure of freedom for everyone, left, right, and center, or uninvolved. The response to the strikes, however, was not nonviolent. This is the existential condition of resistance to tyranny. The German sociologist Max Weber defined the state as a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. So that's what the state is. The claim is to the legitimate use, but the practice of it is usually not in an authoritarian context, as we've heard tonight. Hannah Arendt taught that no one is born with rights. Arendt believed that people do not have rights by virtue of being human, because history has made it too painfully clear that rights are dependent on membership in a political community and are the result of recognition and equality of status, thus compelling us, in an ideal world, to act politically and secure human rights wherever we can. Millions in our own country, until not very long ago, when Jim Crow supposedly ended, did not have the right to have rights. And today, migrants and refugees around the world and whole populations like China do not have the right to claim rights. 8 years ago, millions marched, and we march now. I suspect we will be called to amplify our protests with individual bodies in solidarity against a reinvigorated assault on truth, freedom, and dignity. The historian Timothy Snyder called solidarity the mark of a just person. He noted, our values differ, as they should and must. Freedom is the value of values, because it is what allows that difference to reside in us and in the world we make around us. Each of us has the right to a freedom that allows us to learn, choose, and combine values. We are not the same, but in the most essential sense, we are equal. That beautiful. A beautiful man, John Lewis, said, take a long, hard look down the road you will have to travel. Once you have made a commitment to work for change, know that this transformation will not happen right away. Change often takes time. It rarely happens all at once. In the movement, we didn't know how history would play itself out. When we were getting arrested and writing in jail or standing in unmovable lines on the courthouse steps, we didn't know what would happen, but we knew it had to happen. So, do not obey, resist with nonviolence, and carry bail money.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Hi everybody, my name is Shauna and I'm part of Progressive Mariposa, Yosemite Indivisible, the group that has put this on. Thank you everybody for being here. I just wanted to talk a couple of things. We did invite ACLU to be here to speak and have a booth and provide materials, and they did none of that. They were kind of overburdened by the overwhelming requests, the number of requests that they had for events all around the state, so they weren't able to be here. But I did take it upon myself to make these little cards. They are back in the kids zone. I made 4 different ones. They have links to different trainings through the ACLU if you are interested in knowing your rights. I have one on Know Your Rights for Law Enforcement and Immigration and the law, California Law SB 54. I have one on Know Your Rights on police interactions. These are available in English, and all of these are available in English and Spanish on one side or the other. I have one for Know Your Rights in the immigration court, and then I also have one for Know Your Rights if ICE confronts you. All in English and Spanish, back to back. Feel free to come back and take some. I have some back in the kids zone if you want to take a few and sort of leave them strategically where you think somebody might be able to use that information. A little bit of guerrilla activism. Please feel free to do so. Tape it up somewhere. You can just scan the code and it'll take you right to the training. Also, if you want that information for yourself, please feel free to take them. We also have, as Pilar said before, we have a lot of codes up here that you can scan, so I'm just going to try to read them and get to the microphone at the same time. Let's see here. We have one for Progressive Mariposa. We have one for Indivisible. There was one specifically for, can't see that, Immigrant Defenders, one for Southern Sierra Miwok, Central Valley Partnership, Community Alliance, and Family Farmers. We also have some more of these cards for Progressive Mariposa Yosemite Area Indivisible back at the back booth. If you would like to go and sign our sign-in list, please feel free to do so. If you also want more information about our group, then that's available there. I really want to thank everybody for coming out, and we still have more, but I really encourage you to talk to each other, build community, build coalition. We're kind of in this for the long haul, so build some skills to help build tolerance to distress, because we got more coming. And I just want to thank you all for being here, and keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Very beautiful. Thank you. That's amazing.
We're just about done. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. The next person that we're going to have come up and speak is Maggie. Wait, one moment. Before we get that final thing, I just wanted to separate the pepper from the fly poop, get down to brass tacks, and point out some things. There's handbills and business cards that lay out the Know Your Rights that all immigrants or people who may be mistaken as brown immigrants need to know. Go educate yourself. Does anybody here have an iPhone? If you do, there's a thing called Ice Block. It's not really of much use right now in Mariposa County, but I imagine in the months that come, you may want to check into that app. What it does is it's a crowd-sourced, real-time map of ICE activity. It helps keep people safe, and if you're down, if you have a free afternoon and you want to go do some protesting, you know where to go. This is kind of off the subject, but there's something called the SAVE Act. It's masquerading as this voter reform, but in actuality it limits underprivileged people, the poor. It limits people who can't find their birth certificate or who've changed their name. It basically, any progressive or anybody who needs to use their voice because they need the government to listen to them, it prevents them from going to the polls. Check it out. There's a QR code over at the registration booth, the second booth right there. I'm not going to talk after this. We're going to leave it to Maggie, and then we're going to just disband, eat tacos, and sign up for things. I just wanted to leave you with a couple of last words. I always say that, and then I talk more, so sorry. What we're doing here isn't radical. I mean, that's what you'll hear, right? You'll be like, this is so divisive. I can't just keep your head down. It's fine. It's normal. It's not.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Being treated equally under law.
Told our friend, are you crazy?
It's not radical. Being asked that your government represents you, or that you have a say in who your government is, isn't a radical concept. That was how democracy was founded. That was a pillar. And having equal access to resources. In this day and age, it may look like food or a doctor. Also, not a radical concept. In any other first world nation, it goes without saying. So anybody who thinks that these events here are impractical or of no use, or God forbid, radical. I mean, we can be radical. We can show some civil dissent, right? Or nonviolent dissent, but the core and the reason that we're all here is pretty simple. So with that, we're going to bring Maggie up. She has John Lewis's last essay that he wrote. He never got to present it to the public. He passed before he could. But during his funeral services, a group of young people recited that essay here, and you're going to hear it right now. Maggie, thank you.
Lewis's last words. While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people, motivated simply by human compassion, laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never, ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we were to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina for brightest and best, shoot unwilling concertgoers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in, and then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
Hi.